Okay, well, here it is out of the car. I guess I'll explain to you why we had to struggle with those evap lines. So this is the evap line right here. So it's plugged into the tank like so, and then this end goes to the charcoal canister. That's what you were looking at me working on from below. The reason that we had to take this off is because of this line right here. This is pointing towards the back of the car, and all the access that we have is from this side. Working this way on that connector, and working from this corner down on the fuel filler neck clamp. So access to this is, I don't know, it's just virtually impossible. So that's why it was necessary to take this evap line off. And the other reason for that is because this line is fixed. This vent line is actually fixed to the tank right here. There's no way to get that off either. So that's why we had to go through all the struggle of getting that evap line off. Okay, so here's our pump. I'm going to clean up the area around the neck here with some air, blow the top off, and then I'll show you the tool that you're going to have. Well, not have to have, but the tool that you can rent fairly easily that will make this job a lot easier. One thing I want to point out to you as we get ready to take the ring off to get the pump out is that there are these little retaining clips on each side. So there's two of them. And as you're turning the ring, you're going to have to watch these. You don't want them to break off unless you intend to replace this. This ring is $50. The gasket between the fuel pump and the fuel tank is $50, and this other retaining ring that is on the bottom between here and the pump is also $50. So if you do it Mazda's way, or the recommended manufacturer's way, it's another $150 just in parts for the ring, seal, and retaining ring. Anyway, I'm going to try to make these last because they're still in good shape. So as I'm turning the ring, I'm going to be also pushing these out of the way. It's kind of tedious, but that's what has to be done. In order to get this ring off, to get the pump out, you're going to need one of these tools. I guess like a lot of things, you may not need it. I guess you could use a hammer and hammer it, but my experience is that these little raised portions of the ring break off, so it's not the best way to do it because I think the ring is so large that you really can't get much leverage. The other way that I've seen done is to get the largest size channel locks that you can get, and they will fit outside, and you lock them into these spaces in between the two ribs, and then you can put a screwdriver in between the handles of the channel lock and turn it that way. But why would you want to do that when you can go to your local auto parts store and get one of these? This is part of a fuel pump repair kit, and it's adjustable for whatever size ring you have, and it has cutouts that will go over the ribs on the ring here, and you just take that and adjust it, lock it down, and then you can place it right over the ring like so, and then you can use your, in this case it's a 3/8 inch drive ratchet, and you can start turning it and get it off. One thing I do want to point out to you is that there are alignment marks both on the fuel pump and on the tank. Here you can see there's a little silver dot, and that is where the arrow on the pump lines up. And then I also took the time to make a mark here where there's an additional rib on the ring, and I made a mark there on the fuel tank, so that when everything is back in place and it's tightened up to what I think is going to be the correct torque, or at least the same number of degrees that it's supposed to be turned according to the service manual, that I'm at least back to where I was before. So that's something that you're going to have to keep in mind. The torque spec on this is 80 foot-pounds. So instead of using my 3/8 inch drive, I'm going to use a converter on my 1/2 inch drive. And I'm going to slowly start to work this off. And since I'm working alone, I've got to get in a position where I can get some leverage. And then I'm just going to slowly start to turn this, and I have to keep easing the tabs, because believe it or not, they work well enough to prevent you from turning this. And there you can see it's coming. Yeah, and that's going to happen for sure. If I had somebody here to hold the tank for me, it'd be a lot easier. So anyway, you get the idea. I'm just going to keep working it around until the cap is, or the ring is loose, and then we'll get at the pump. Okay, I'm at the point now where I can turn it by hand. So I'm just releasing the tabs as I go. Eventually this will be up high enough that the tabs don't catch anymore. And then you can spin it pretty easily. There we go. Almost there. There we go. Oops. Okay. So there's your ring. And here's your pump. And of course, under that you've got this other retaining ring that I mentioned that has these locking clips on it. And again, Mazda recommends replacing those, but we're not going to be doing that today, because I have found that since I had this off before, that they're all in very good shape. I do have spares that I got from the junkyard off of a low mileage car, just in case one of these breaks. Anyway, so I'm going to clean this area up, then pull the pump out. Then I'll show you the new pump, and we'll slide the new one in here and button everything back up. Alright, let's pull this pump out. While you're down here, have a look inside your tank and make sure that there isn't anything unusual. And now, I'm going to take this ring off and make sure that there's no debris or anything that would compromise the seal. It looks pretty good. This ring is in excellent condition, even though it's got quite a bit of mileage. It's still supple, soft, and no cracks whatsoever. So I'm just going to wipe that out. Where the ring seats here, and then I'll put this back in and we'll drop the new pump in. All right. Okay, I've got the ring seated in here. One thing I will say is that it does seem to be a little bit larger than maybe it should be. Maybe because it's been under compression for so long. So I had to, work it around so that it's seated correctly. So now I'm going to slip the pump in. Use a little caution not to bend that arm. And it drops right in there. And there is an alignment tab right here, and there's an opening in this ring on the bottom. So once I get it lined up, so the arrow is now lined up with the mark on the tank. The notch, or I should say the alignment pin on the top of the tank, or on the top of the pump, is in place. So I'm going to push it down, and I don't want it to move once I get it down there. So I'm going to take that. Now I can get this ring started while I'm holding it down. And just to double check. Yep, gasket's down all the way. Everything's lined up. Now the service manual states that using this extra rib that I mentioned earlier as your starting point, it's supposed to, the ring is supposed to turn, so basically 1 2/3 of a turn, so 270 degrees. So you can hear now that the locking tabs are starting to engage, so I don't have to hold it down anymore. And you can also see that the extra rib here that I was talking about needs to be all the way over here to be fully tight. They also state that it should be 80 foot-pounds if you want to use a torque wrench to get it. So, get our tool back on here and turn it by hand a little bit. See, we still have to go from there over to here. We're still lined up here. See if I can get in a position to hold it here. We're almost there. I think I'm going to put my torque wrench on here real quick. just because I was curious the last time I did this to see what the torque was. I got the marks to align, but I still was curious to see if I was at the torque or not. So there's 80, and let me just double check that spec. So let's see what they say. Cap angle rotation, I was wrong, so 680 degrees rotation, and the tightening torque is 82 foot-pounds or more. Okay, so when I said 270, that was the reference mark on the tank itself, but the rotation is 620 to 680 degrees or more. So let's see what it feels like with a torque wrench on there. See if I can hold this baby down. Would be nice to have a helper, but oh man, it's amazingly tight. Get that out of the way. Hopefully these ribs will hold out. Oh man. A couple more clicks. Holy cow. Alright, so at this point I'm lined up with the original spot where it was at when it came off. So let's go a little bit further. Let's see. Oh. Okay. Take a little break here. It's about 95 degrees and incredibly humid today. So this is it's kind of hard work. I'm going to go a little bit further. See if I can get a click out of this torque wrench at 80. Man, I would hate to break anything. Holy cow. Alright. Alright, I'm going to switch to a different set of ribs here. Just to give those a break. And to get in a different spot on the cap. There we go. All right. Let's see what we can do now. That's probably the best way to hold it. I tell you what, I am past the mark here by quite a bit. I just don't feel like I can get 80 pounds out of this, guys. Not without running into some problems. So let's think about it. Everything's seated. Yeah, I think I'm happy with this. You know, just out of curiosity, let's see what torque we do have. Let's go down to 75. Actually, let's go down to 70. Let's see if we have 70. Alrighty. Yep, we got 70. Let's go back up to 75. 75. Yeah. Yep, I'm just not going to go any further than that. I'd say it's at about roughly 75-ish. I've got plenty of the rotation on the cap, so I meet that criteria. These are locked in. Everything looks good. Hopefully I didn't move it out of the picture. So at this point, I think we are ready to put this baby back in. Alright, well, we've made it this far. Time to slide the tank back up into position. I'll get one of the little jacks that you saw I had under it, and then I will connect up the evap lines, or the evap line, both connectors, and then I'll get to work on the fuel filler neck, and then actually at that point you're ready to sort of bolt it back into place. So this is the home stretch. I think the hardest part from this point on, at least until you're ready to bolt everything back in, is making sure that that worm drive clamp on the fuel filler neck is in the same position that it was in when you took it off. I just think that that's really important to prevent any leaks. Okay guys, I've got both of the evap lines connected back up, that one and the one on top of the tank, and then I also made sure that I tucked the or snapped the small evap line back into where it fits on top of the tank. So now I'm going to get this clamp in position, if I can. Get my big hands out of the way. Get it over the fuel filler neck here. It's not cooperating. There we go. There we go. I'll scoot that out of the way. It's in the same orientation that it was before, with the nut, I guess you'd call it, facing up. Alright, so now I have to push the tank and the neck together. And, you know, I just reach my hand around the back side and grab the filler neck. And while I'm holding that, I'll reach up to the front of the tank and start to wiggle it back. And the edge of the hose here is going to have to be right up against this tie wrap. And believe it or not, that tie wrap is on every one of these. I've seen 3 of these so far, and they all have a tie wrap on here, which I don't fully understand why, but I guess it's there for a reason. So I'm going to get to work on that, and then we tighten up the clamp. Okay, I've got the tank pushed up into the filler neck. I've got the clamp on, and you can see my 2 alignment marks on the clamp. Let's see if I can get some more light on it, on the clamp and the filler neck. So I'm going to tighten up the clamp in that position, and hopefully, you know, that will prevent any pockets or spots in the connection that can leak. I'm kind of surprised that they have a worm drive clamp on here to begin with, but they do, so that's what we're working with. I've got the front strap bolt in and mostly tight. I've got the two lines, the fuel line and the Evap line connected back up. And now I'm tightening up the two straps in the back. And then after that, we get to go back up top, make our connections, and go to the next step. One thing that I forgot to mention is that it helps to take the shield that's here in the right hand corner in front of the back wheel. It helps to take that off because that's, you know, a major access point to where you need to be to you know, get your hand under the tank to do that classic reach around that I mentioned before. So I just wanted to point that out. When you're done, just put it in, and there's a couple of 10mm screws. Well, it's a moment of truth time. Tank is back in. Everything's connected. Everything's tightened down. There's fuel in the tank. Looking underneath, there are no leaks. So that's a good sign. That at least means that the fuel filler neck is holding for now. And the connector is on. With the AutoBest fuel pump, I had absolutely horrible time with the connector. It was defective, as well as the check valve. It just was a mess. I can't tell you the trouble I had to go through with that stupid connector, just so you know, the car could be driven in between the time I discovered all those problems and now. So this connector fits perfectly. There's no wiggle or play in it, and it looks good. So let's go around to the front. Still have my fuel gauge connected. And got the gauge propped up so we can see if we have our prime. And there's a good bit of glare on it, but we should still be able to see what happens when we turn the key. So here we go. Alright, got quite a bit of air in it, but I can hear it priming. 2. Sorry for the beeping. Alright, we're getting there. Alright, I can hear the air escaping. Let's give it a try. Shouldn't start, I wouldn't think, at this pressure, but... almost. There we go. Alright, this ought to do it. There we go. Alright, so we are running at, looks like around 56 psi with the new pump. So that's right in the middle of the spec. And you can see that under pressure, or under load rather, it's holding pretty well. I'm going to let it run for a couple of minutes, and then the moment of truth will be turning the car off and watching that pressure and seeing what happens to that. I sure hope it holds. I don't want to have to do this again, or discover that the problem was with the injectors all along and I've been wasting my time. That will be a nightmare as well as very embarrassing. So I'm going to let it run for a couple of minutes, look around for leaks, and then we'll turn it off and see if it holds. While the car is running and waiting to check the final resting pressure, I decided to hook up the Vantage and take a look at the waveform from the fuel pump. So you can see I've got my low amp clamp on. I've got it on the negative wire, and using the component test in the Vantage, you can see that we've got a pretty decent waveform running at about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7.5 amps, I'd say. And you know, the waveform looks okay to me. It's getting ready to turn it off. Okay, still running, purring right along at 56 psi. No leaks. We'll switch it off and see what the holding pressure is. Alright, if you recall me saying before, the holding pressure should be 36 psi minimum after 5 minutes. You can see that the gauge is staying perfectly stable at 51 psi, which is really good. I am thrilled to see that. So what I'm going to do is wait 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have another look and see where the pressure is then. But this is really good news and a great sign. Well, there you have it, folks. It's been almost, well, probably a little bit over 10 minutes, and it's sitting right there at 45 psi. So we are done. Let's see if it starts up now. A little bit easier than it used to. Remember, that was the whole reason for changing the pump, was long crank times due to that resting pressure going to 0. There we go. All right. Good news. This is a follow-up video to my fuel pressure testing video. In that video, I showed you how to test your pressure, but I also was testing with a defective fuel pump. If you recall from the first video, the resting pressure, or the pressure that stays in the system after the fuel pump stops, or you switch the car off, you maybe run into the grocery store or whatever, you come back out, there's still supposed to be some pressure in the system. And as you saw from my fuel pump in the last video, there was none. It was going right back down to 0 after the fuel pump turned off. So I've got a new fuel pump in. I've already run the car, so I know that everything's working well, but I want to show you what you should expect. So the gauge is still hooked up, and I'm using my spare relay that I showed you to activate the fuel pump. So I'm going to go ahead and activate it for 10 seconds. And you can see that during that 10-second period, the pressure was about 56 psi, which is within spec. It's a little bit lower than the other pump I had in here, but still in spec. And here's the difference. The pump has been stopped for several seconds now, and you can see that the needle is hardly moving at all. Now, I've done this before. I started recording, and I waited for 10, almost 15 minutes, and the pressure stayed up around the 50 psi range. So that's the difference. You want a pump that builds and keeps pressure under load, and of course during that prime when you first turn the key on, but you also want a pump that holds the pressure after you turn the car off. Now again, I pointed out in the other video that there could be other reasons why you're losing fuel pressure. For example, you could have a leak, You could have leaky injectors or whatever the case may be. There certainly are other possibilities, but when all of those things are known to be good, and you know, you're certain that there aren't any other problems, then your resting pressure, as you're seeing it here, should stay for quite some time, and that's very important. So that's a fix for this car. I hope you learned you know, what to expect, and this way you can do it yourself.